Thanks for tuning in. Here's a new video with an overview of my 1986 Mustang SVO. I've always had a thing for the SVO and started seriously looking to buy one around 2003. I bought this car in August 2004 from a gentleman in Allentown, PA, and I've used it as my 3-season daily driver up until around 2018. When I bought it, it had just under 90,000 miles on the odometer, and over the course of daily driver duties, I've managed to add another 55,000 miles. Obviously, it's a 2.3-liter turbocharged intercooled 4-cylinder with a 5-speed manual transmission, and it's been through a lot of changes over the years. Truthfully, my ownership of this SVO has been a roller coaster of both highs and lows, and as such, I have a love-hate relationship. Let's turn the clock back to October 2004 when I drove in my SVO approximately 900 miles from Western Mass to attend my very first SVO Club of America reunion in Lexington, Kentucky. On the way down, I averaged between 22 and 25 miles per gallon and the car ran like a top. Back in the day, the SVO CA reunions were generally a 3-day event with drag races or dyno session on Friday, a car show on Saturday, and an autocross on Sunday. During Sunday's autocross, I ran my SVO in the morning session, and during my last run, I began to notice a noise from the top side of the engine. It sounded like a hydraulic lifter or a cam follower problem, so after the event, I pulled the valve cover to take a look. Everything seemed normal, including the engine temp and oil pressure. So Monday morning, I pulled out along with the rest of the northeast-bound crew. My car ran normal for about 300 miles, then the engine ticking noise turned to a more noticeable rap. We pulled off the side of the highway to take a look, and the general consensus was that the car shouldn't be driven any further to avoid catastrophic engine damage. After getting the car back to Northeast PA, I proceeded to pull the engine and send it to Ritter Precision Machining in Lehighton, PA. To make a long story short, I spun a rod bearing, so I went full on with the rebuild at RPM. By late November, I got the rebuilt engine back from RPM and started working weekends to install it back in the car. After about a month of cleaning, painting, and reassembling in my spare time, I finally dropped the finished engine into the car on Christmas Eve 2004. Over the Christmas break, I finished up the engine install and fired it up. Initially it ran great, but had a leak from the cam sprocket bolt that needed to be sealed up better. However, it was finally running and I couldn't wait for spring of 2005 to drive the car again. Over the next following years, I continued to drive the car and managed to put quite a few miles on it with relatively few issues. I also continued to attend additional SVO CA reunions. Here's a picture from the 2007 Sunday Autocross event. And here's a picture of my SVO from the fall of 2008 on its last official trouble-free voyage up to the endless mountains of north central PA. On my way to the 2008 SVO CA reunion, I drove with the Northeast crew for about 400 miles when it started again. That sinking feeling that something is majorly wrong. Yep, the engine started making some bad noises, shortly followed with the oil pressure dropping to zilch. I ended up parking my SVO off exit 79 of Interstate 79 at the 79er restaurant. I hooked a ride with another member the rest of the way to the event, and then flew home from Kentucky and rented a U-Haul and drove to pick up my POS. Here's the round trip mileage from Northeast PA to West Virginia and back to Northeast PA, where I stored the car at my in-laws' house. After getting the car back into the garage, I immediately put it up for sale in the SVO CA classifieds, but no serious offers. So it sat for over a year. To say that I was disgusted was an understatement. The weekend before attending the 2009 reunion, I towed the SVO up to my house in Mass. And after going to the 2009 event without my car, I came away with some SVO excitement and motivation. So I spent some time in the garage prepping the engine for removal again. After closer inspection, I'm happy to report back that the rod survived. Well, sort of. At least it didn't go through the side of the block. But the bearings didn't. Anyway, it appeared that most of the number 1 rod bearing was found here in the pan. The crankshaft was screwed, as well as number 1 connecting rod. Rather than wait for my original short block to be repaired for a second time, I opted to go with a used short block to temporarily get my car back on the road. In January of 2010, I started to disassemble the used engine so I could clean it up and install new bearings. Crank bearings looked good. Rod bearings had seen better days, so I pulled all the pistons. Ordered most of the parts that I'll need to put the engine back together. That included a new oil pump, full gasket kit, and new rod bearings. Once all the parts are in, I put some time into the short block. I installed a new rear main seal and torqued the main bearings. Then I home polished all the rod journals on the crank and replaced the rod bearings. Next was to clean up the pistons and reinstall them into the bores. I checked the clearance of all the new rod bearings with the plastic gauge. After generous coating of engine assembly lube, I torqued the rod caps for the last time. Then I installed a new oil pump with the pickup tube. Now that the bottom end of the engine was finally quote-unquote rebuilt, I finally bolted the pan on and started prepping it for paint. Here's a short block is painted. This time I went with Ford gray instead of black. Next, I cleaned and painted the head. I used this newly acquired polished valve cover instead of the gold and black one that was previously on the car. And since I was taking pictures, here are the internals complete with the new cam bearings as previously mentioned. Last step in the basement was to add a few mounting brackets back on the short block. After engine refreshening, I needed to deal with the cleanup of the engine bay. By February 2010, I was getting closer to having the engine bay ready for paint. However, it was in the middle of a New England winter and it was just too damn cold to get any work done on the engine bay. But by mid-March, the engine bay was almost ready for paint. Here it is all cleaned up, then masked and ready for primer and paint. Primer's on, and then comes the snowball effect. I debated about removal of the power brake booster. It was a real pain in the ass, but I'm glad I did it. The underside was pretty messed up with rust due to fluid leaks over the years. Here's a picture of the bottom side of the brake booster after cleaning it and sanding. To deal with the rust, I used Eastwood's rust converter, which needs about 48 hours to completely dry. And finally, the engine bay was nice and shiny again. There's nothing like the smell of a fresh coat of Centauri acrylic enamel in the evening. After painting, reassembly, and prep of the engine bay, I moved the short block from my basement up to the garage and worked on a final assembly, starting with the head studs. After a few nights in the garage and some head scratching and part scavenging, the engine was just about ready to drop in. Now here's one of those WTF moments. The gold valve cover was the one that was on the car when I bought it. The polished valve cover was the one going on this time. Note that the breather hold on the polished valve cover is smaller in diameter and needed to be opened up. And here are the fruits of my labor. By early April 2010, looky what do we see? It fired right up, so I let it idle for a while, bringing the engine up to temp, then set the timing to 10 degrees. The temporary engine ran well and idled nicely. So at this point, I was finally back to full circle. In the fall of 2008, I started out with a running car that chewed up all the internal bearings, and after this engine swap, roughly 18 months later, I was back on the road once again with a running driving SVO. But wait, there's more. In this next installment, we have part 3. Fast forward about 5 years to August 2015. The temporary engine had started to use oil, leak oil, and had a slight noise at startup. Here are the pictures of the short block when it first came back from Rebuilder. A few additional pictures of the carnage that survived the engine disaster in 2008. Note the discoloration of the big end of the connecting rod and the cap that survived the short time without a rod bearing. So the first order was to pull the engine so I could swap the SVO's original head from the current temporary short block back onto my fully rebuilt original short block. Then I prepped the original short block for a fresh coat of Ford gray paint. I never did like the black paint the engine rebuilder used. And here's the short block with the ARP head studs ready for the head. And here are a few pictures of the engine back together, almost ready to drop back in the car. I moved the temporary engine outside. Note that this temporary short block from Part 2 lived in the car for just about 23,000 miles during my 5+ years of semi-daily driver duties. Finger crossed that many more years of happy SVO motoring with the rebuilt engine now installed back in my SVO. Finally, the rebuilt engine is back in the engine bay. All this work was completed in one weekend by me, starting Friday night through Sunday. And then working Monday and Tuesday evenings, I finished up the installation. The SVO engine Redux Part 3 is finally a wrap. I took the car for a quick spin to ensure that everything was good to go. The engine does run so much smoother compared to the temporary short block that I had just removed. While waiting for a good bit to start this process, I was definitely glad to finally get it completed. This is the current configuration of my SVO, having added another approximately 10,000 miles since I completed this Part 3. So after almost 20 years of ownership, around 55,000 driving miles, and 3 engine swaps, do I love it or hate it? Well, it probably depends on the day, the week, the month. There are many times that I absolutely love this SVO, and as you can imagine, there were some real lows during its tenure with the car. I participated in several SVO CA events, local car shows, and met many fellow SVO enthusiasts from across the country. I've even featured my SVO in several how-to articles in the SVO CA's newsletter over the years. This is the first video on my 86 Mustang SVO, but not the last. I've got a bunch of other project stories and photos of this car to share with the community. If this is your first time watching one of my videos, please consider subscribing to my channel. Don't forget to hit that like button and feel free to comment below. I generally respond to all the comments. And thanks for watching.